Welcome to Cloud on Air, live webinars from Google Cloud. We're hosting webinars daily, and you're watching Cloud 101, where speakers discuss the fundamental concepts of Google Cloud Platform and learn from the best practices in different markets. My name's Stephen Elliott, and today we'll be talking about understanding and analyzing cost data with billing reports. And joining me today is Greg Maddock. You can ask questions anytime on the platform, and we have Googlers on standby to answer them. So let's get started. Our agenda for today is to talk about the basic tools that we give you on Google Cloud Platform to help you understand and manage and be confident about your cloud costs. In particular, we'll be doing an orientation to billing reports and then overview some of the common use cases. What I'm particularly excited about today, as you know, I'm a product manager on Google Cloud Billing from the past webinars, but I asked Greg to come because he can really speak to the customer experiences here.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, as Stephen mentioned, my name is Greg Maddock. I'm an account representative from the Google Cloud side. I work with large cloud customers in helping them understand how to get going with the cloud. And before I started doing that, I actually managed cloud teams in a previous life.
Yeah, so the billing product team and other product managers really rely on Greg and other account reps like him to get a better understanding of customer use cases, and it will be really valuable as we dive into the use cases here. What Google Cloud provides. So we'll wrap up with best practices and then Q&A. So let's get started. After this webinar, very concretely, we want you to be able to do the following. Give access to billing reports to those who should have visibility into your GCP costs. Now this is really important. A lot of people don't understand the permissions required to do this, or they do it too late. And as you'll see later, just providing the basic permissions and tools and making sure your employees and team members know how to use them is a really important first step. Then we want to make sure you understand how to use billing reports to quickly answer cost questions. And finally, how to jump from the billing report views into other tools that can give you a deeper understanding of the cloud costs.
Right. It's super important to know that there's quick places to go to just see an overview of what's going on in your environment, but also be able to see how you can get to that next level of detail, which, as we all know, right, that's where you're really going to spend your time. That's where people really start to learn to understand what it means to run in the cloud, what's different from what they've done traditionally with their own data centers.
Right. So let's start with the orientation to billing reports. You may have seen these questions in other presentations we've given, whether in this webinar series or in our next talks, or if you've talked to me at Next and I just pulled out these questions. And that's because they're foundational. And sometimes the simple framing just helps align my conversations and customers' conversations about what they need to get out of cloud cost management. So the first one is basically, how much does my application or the work I'm doing on Google Cloud cost? And on the customer side, they're tying this back to value.
Right, and this is such a difference in thinking in the cloud versus what customers have traditionally done. When if you look at how IT departments are typically structured, where you've got an application development team and then a set of infrastructure folks, and very rarely were you able to see sort of the full end-to-end cost of any given application. Now with the cloud and the type of reporting that you can get out of that, you're truly able to see that.
Right. And immediately from there, the next question would be, well, what are the cost trends? What did this cost me last week, last month, last quarter? And where do I think my costs are going to go based on my own understanding of the status quo, but also based on my business planning? And relatedly, what are the cost drivers? So what would lead cost to increase? Of course, there's cases where cost increases are great. If your business is growing and costs are increasing, as much as or less than your revenue is growing, that's a great story.
Absolutely.
The tools we provide to specifically answer these questions are what you see on the screen. Just a summary, we offer billing reports. So those are out-of-the-box charts that you can configure to slice and dice the costs the way you want to see them. Then we have billing exports. So we mentioned being able to jump off from the quick answers and easy answers you can get from the billing reports into one of the tools that gives you a deep dive. And I know we've worked closely with Greg with several big customers on the specific deep dive tools.
Right, and honestly, when I used to do this for a living as a customer of the cloud, being able to get to that export and being able to see and slice and dice down to the lowest level of detail, that's where I lived, right? And that's what I'm super excited about.
Yeah. And then finally, budgets and alerts. So we mentioned the ability to control your cloud costs being very important, and also just the ability to be confident and have a sense of confidence about your team's cloud costs is really important. And this is what we try to do with budgets and alerts. But also just think of these as principles as well. Reporting tools to get a quick understanding, export or deep dive tools to really drill down, and then budgets and alerts, tools that help you gain confidence and get a proactive sense of what's going on in your environment. So at a glance, these tools look like the following. Here is billing reports. The first thing you'll notice on billing reports is it's kind of structured around the questions we just went through. So what are the costs in the period that you're looking at? Here, the costs are $1,620.81. And the next most important question is, well, what's the trend in that cost? So the trend in that cost is over the similar previous 25-day period. This screenshot was taken from February 1st to February 25th. So in the previous 25-day period, costs were this was a 9.65% increase over that period. And then the forecast. So again, what's the trend going into the future, not just from the past? Well, the forecast going to the end of the current period that the report's looking at is $1,844.21.
So Stephen, can you just explain what actually goes into that forecast? How are we calculating that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we used to have, if you've been paying attention to the reports and the changes over time, we used to have a line, and it was a line that we built through some logic to say, well, what's the most recent amount of data that seems to be a recent secular trend? So a lot of forecasting and modeling have challenges with figuring out what an outlier is and what a relevant data point is. So we have a bunch of logic to try to figure out what the most recent secular trend is and ignore outliers or trends before that shouldn't be feeding into the forecast. In addition to that, and you'll see this later on one of the future slides, we're looking at the variations within the month. In particular, because we offer some rather innovative discount tools like sustained use discounts or promotional credits, which actually lower your cost in some cases as you spend more during the month. And our forecast model also models some of those stair-stepping behaviors, which actually you can see in the kind of grayed out chart here. So I'll come back to that. But
awesome.
One of our key metrics, if you're a modeler, you're always looking at the accuracy of your forecast against real data. And so we're always measuring that behind the scenes and making sure that our forecasting algorithm improves over time. Versus the outcome, what your costs actually end up being.
Yeah, that's fantastic, because I know, again, as a practitioner, I spent a lot of time trying to create those things, and knowing the thought that went into this really gives me confidence in what's being presented.
So here, we said that over the previous 25-day period, it was a 9.65% increase in costs, but actually when we project this out to the end of the month, again, because of the sustained use discounts in this case specifically, the end of the month here actually sees and projects that the cost will be 6.5% lower. So we offer some presets. These are just common views that you may want. For example, looking at the current month costs for all projects, that's a very common view. Another one is to look at the last month cost. And you can customize that time range. So you can say, I want to look at the last month, I want to look at the last 90 days, I want to look at year to date, and then you can also just enter any start date and end date that you like. And one important tool is the group by tool. It sounds simple, but it's very powerful. You're probably familiar with this if you're familiar with SQL or any other tools that just let you create your own stack chart. The group by features that we offer are to group by project. So as you may know from previous webinars or just having used GCP, the project is the fundamental container for any GCP environment. You can always talk between projects if you want, but basically teams usually own one or more projects when they're building their applications.
Right, and it's great to be able to see sort of the area that you have control over summarized that way.
Yeah. Then there's the product. So the product might be compute engine, it might be cloud storage, BigQuery, and then under each product, you could also group by a bunch of SKUs. So here we've selected SKUs, and the SKU could be, for example, in BigQuery, it could be the SKU that represents query costs. That SKU's name is analysis, or it could be the SKU that represents your BigQuery storage, and that SKU's name is storage, I think active storage. And you could do the same for other products as well. So in Compute Engine, there's SKUs for different machine types, for internet egress and things like that. Yeah. So then there's a set of filters. And here, by default, you might want to start with looking at everything, all projects, all products, all SKUs. And you can do a bunch of the drill down just within the reports. So group by something that has meaning to you. So usually the first view is group by projects and see how the project costs are flowing. And then if you see a spike in one of the project costs, filter on that project, and then group by product and see which product is causing that cost trend that you're interested in.
Right, and these are a great way to just very, very quickly be able to see what's going on in your environment, identify the outliers, right, and maybe find areas that you want to drill into.
Right. So here's an interesting one. Credits, the credits toggle. As I mentioned, we have sustained use discounts, promotional discounts, and we have a bunch of credits that apply against usage. So the great thing about this is just off the bat, the credits start reducing your costs. But for example, budgets and alerts knows about them. So if you set a budget alert to say, please alert me when I spend more than $1,000 in the project, because the credits apply to usage immediately, it alerts you when your actual costs are going to exceed $1,000. The nuance here is maybe you want to exclude credits for certain analysis.
Right. So credits are always something that customers love seeing show up in their billing reports, right? It's a good feeling, but like you said, being able to back those out and be able to see what was our actual usage is really important when you start looking at budgeting and sort of talking about future projects.
Right. So there's two cases in particular. You can think of these as mini best practices where you might want to actively advise your teams and for yourself to turn the credits toggle off when you're looking at things. So one use case might be you just want to use costs as a proxy for usage. Now this sounds like it might not be a good idea, but actually because usage metrics are so heterogeneous, one might be core hours, one might be memory hours, one might be pub sub messages. You can't aggregate that in a meaningful way. But interestingly, a lot of customers find it useful to just use costs as a proxy for operational stability. It's not perfect, but you can catch a lot of interesting issues like runaway storage, failed cron jobs, things like that, because if they have any cost impact, you'll start to see a trend that deviates from normal. So that's case number one where you might say, you know what, let's take credits out of it. I want to look at costs as basically a proxy for storage. The second use case is accounting treatment. So if you are in regular discussions with the financial admins or the CFO or whoever at the big Midwest retailing company, which Greg probably is, they may have their own accounting treatment that differs from how Google applies credits. And so in those cases, your project owner it might behoove them just to look at their unvarnished costs, and then that's the good directionally correct indication of their spending, and then central admin, central finance tells them how to account for credits at the end of the month.
Yeah, and I think the important thing to note here is there is flexibility in how you do this, right? Because every organization is going to have a different way of treating things like credits, and being able to toggle them on and off is very important.
Yep. So then chart view options, these are pretty simple. You can look at a daily view. We also provide a monthly view, and then you can view it by line chart or bar chart. We will be introducing a change where you can also these are all based on the calendar days. So soon you'll start to see the ability to switch to an invoice month view. And the key difference there is that usage is metered on a calendar day. We're using timestamps. We jokingly refer to our time zone, which is the West Coast time zone, as Google Standard Time. And so you may want to convert that to your local time zone. But on the invoice is a very specific document that says these are the things we know we can charge you for in a month, and sometimes usage doesn't make it in time to the invoice, and so it rolls over to the next month. Or there's things like rounding error that just the invoice charges you to the penny. Sometimes we measure things a little bit more precisely, and so the reporting will change from that. And these are things we actually talk to account teams and customers a lot about, which is what are they seeing on the invoice and how they make sure that matches reports.
Absolutely, because at some point, if you're the billing administrator for a cloud account, at some point somebody's going to walk into your office or your cube with an invoice and say, tell me how we match this up to what you're seeing so that we can understand better what's going on.
Right. So there's a bunch of work we're doing that you'll start to see where we make that easier in reports, since everything has traditionally been in the UI, a calendar month view. So finally, the stack chart, and now that the chart is actually bright, we can kind of point this out, but here we've grouped by SKU. So this first one is, sorry. This now looks like, I can't read it, but we've grouped by SKU. So the top one is the one that's spent the most. And then you can see the dotted line, which we'll point out here, is the forecast curve. And it follows the cyclical trend within the month. And if it doesn't just, actually has no knowledge of the structure of discounts or the structure of the cycle. So if you have your own cyclicality within the month, currently the forecast will pick that up if it notices that that's a repeated cyclicality. And this is very useful. So if we zoomed out on this one, you'd actually see, even if your costs are increasing month over month, you'd actually see the stair stepping go down each month and then jump up to a higher point the next month and jump up to the higher point the next month. And then finally, the summary table, which gives you the aggregate for the time period summary for each thing that you've grouped by, and then including the cost before credits. And this table is a little bit narrow, but then you'd have cost after credits. So we mentioned that it's important, and at the end of this or while you're watching, you can do this, to give permissions to team members who should be able to see reports. Very concretely, there's two permissions that grant cost viewing access. There's either the billing account permission that gives users visibility into all costs under the billing account, or there's a very specific one, which is project cost visibility. So there's a couple roles that just automatically get this. Anyone who's a billing account admin or a billing account viewer can get ability to view all costs under the billing account. Billing accounts cover many, many projects in most cases. So that means they can see all project costs that roll up to the same billing account. And by default, all project owners and users get the right to see their own costs.
Yeah, which absolutely makes sense, right? Because again, at the end of the day, one of the things that the cloud enables is for people that own projects like or applications should be able to see the full end-to-end cost of what they are delivering on the cloud. Whereas the billing account owner, obviously having somebody or a group of people that have visibility into everything that's going on in their cloud billing account is going to be very important as well.
One thing to note here is it's useful, if you have an internal wiki or Pages or what's the other one called? Just an internal site. You might consider advertising who the group is that represent your billing account admins. You don't necessarily want to give every project user, maybe have some custom roles, we'll get into that, access into costs, but it's useful to at least advertise who the person is they need to reach out to get the right permission or to get some information about their project.
Absolutely, and whether you publish it or not, I guarantee those people are going to be found over time as people start drilling in and understanding their costs a little bit better.
So what does this look like? So if you want to grant roles on the billing account, one thing to keep in mind is the billing account is a separate hierarchy from the project folder org hierarchy. Now I know I said projects roll up to a billing account. That was a little sloppy language. The specific language is a project is paid for by a billing account. And it's not a one-to-one relationship, it's a many-to-one relationship. So many projects can be paid for by the same billing account. Projects actually roll up to folders, and folders roll up to orgs if you're an org user. And so since the billing account is a pays-for relationship, not an actual resource hierarchy relationship, to grant permissions on the billing account, you need to go into the billing console, which is what you see here. And then on the overview page of the billing console, you can see on the right-hand pane, there's a place to view the account administrators. There's 5 here. The account viewers, there's 7 members. When you click Add Members, then you can add a member. And think about what you want them to have.
Yeah, and this is an area where, obviously we as Google have worked with a lot of customers helping to get this set up and have a lot of best practices around how many billing accounts should you have, where does it make sense to have multiple, and this is something where as customers start using the cloud more, they can work with their local account team to understand what has been successful for other customers.
Yeah, and here, try to avoid assigning just one person billing account admin rights. As in, try to avoid, don't do it. Make sure you give it to multiple people. Because people take vacation or worse things happen to them. And just make sure you have safety in numbers. So what about the project? So I mentioned these are 2 different hierarchies. What if you want to grant just cost viewing access on the project? So here you would go to the IAM console. So when you're in the normal cloud console, go to the left nav, and then select IAM and admin, which you can see here. And then in there you can see, I have a sandbox project, permissions for project Stevens Sandbox. I'm the owner. Down down here. And that's great. I created it. I'm the owner. I can do a bunch of stuff. I can even get rid of it. There's some service accounts here. If I wanted to add someone, here, maybe I want to add Greg to the Sandbox project. I could just click add and then figure out what role I want to give him. Maybe it is just project user because he doesn't own it, but I want him to feel free to use it, see costs on it.
And that's smart. You wouldn't want to give me the full keys to the kingdom.
Right. I mean, I know Greg well. I don't know him that well yet. But maybe the default roles aren't sufficient. So creating custom roles is a really powerful tool on Google Cloud. So if you go down to the bottom of the nav, there's the roles section. So we're still in the project and we're thinking about, well, what roles do I want on this project? You could do this higher up in the hierarchy too. So that's the power of the resource hierarchy. If you want to assign roles at a folder level or at an org level. But here, if I click create role, now in the create role dialog, the powerful thing here is when I click on the add permissions, which is kind of hidden behind this lightbox here, but add permission gives me a lightbox for add permissions.
Right.
And so that I don't have to navigate hundreds and hundreds of IAM permissions, which usually are fairly decently named, but they can be a little opaque. What you can do is filter permissions by role. So what we do here is, how about we filter permissions by the viewer role and see who's allowed to view the project and add the permissions we like under that. So here maybe the only thing I want to add to a certain custom role is the billing.resourcecost.get for the project, which is the permission language for the permission that allows you to see the spending on the project.
Right.
And then you could create the custom role.
Yeah, and I mean, again, that just shows the flexibility of the platform, right? Because again, just having all or nothing type access probably isn't going to work for almost anybody. Right. Being able to create whatever type of custom roles you want is very important.
Yeah, we have run into many different types of customers. Some are pretty freewheeling and want everyone to see everything. Others are much more buttoned up. Right. And don't want anybody to see most anything.
Yeah.
And what's right for your company or a specific team or a stealth project, there's no right answer in general.
Yeah.
So we mentioned diving from reports into more detailed tools. Here's a list of some tools you should be familiar with. There are others, but these are some really common ones. So billing export.
Right.
We'll actually have another webinar where we dive more into this. In the first webinar in the series, we demoed a little bit of how you can create dashboards straight off of billing export. But the real power is that it's based in BigQuery, which is a phenomenally fast tool and can be paired with other things and other data sets really quickly, and has all the granular detail of your cost line items.
Yeah, as I mentioned when we first started, this is the part that I get really excited about, because it allows you to take it to that next level beyond just a report and dig into whatever level of detail you want. It's very powerful.
Yeah. So then from there, one really nice place you can dive into is the audit and activity logs in Stackdriver. And we'll show you a screenshot of how easy this is, but it's a really powerful tool. So if you see a spike in the report and know that it's for a certain SKU, let's say an N1 standard SKU in the Compute Engine product, and you know what project it happened in, so that you can drill down on, as we kind of demonstrated earlier, really quickly. You can jump straight to Stackdriver logging and look up the user who started inserting new instances. And that you could do within a minute or two, just as, for example, a billing admin or just as a manager who has the access to the right tools.
Right.
There's Compute Engine usage export to cloud storage. So if you want to see something at the resource level, Compute Engine gives you the usage logs. Similarly, Kubernetes has something called usage metering. You should check out a fun blog post titled "Whose Line Item Is It Anyway?" And that one talks about how you can break down all your Kubernetes usage costs into a BigQuery table. Right. Now you can join that BigQuery table against billing export, and there's some demo dashboards that they've built for that. And then another one to think about is storage access and storage logs. Again, there might be cases where your storage costs are doing something interesting and you want to just dive into the detail about what's going on.
Yeah, and I think the important thing to mention here is every organization is going to approach the cloud a little bit differently, and the pieces that are going to be very important to them. The point here is, outside of just the billing reports and the export that we give you, there are multiple additional tools that you're going to become familiar with over time as you start investing in, maybe it's Compute Engine or Kubernetes. They each have their own set of reporting that you can dive even deeper into.
And the biggest one I probably left off, and that was a miss on my part, is your own personal operational logs. So we have customers who run App Engine projects or their own services where they have heartbeat logs that say this is a session for customer X, or this is for job Y, and they're joining that against the cost data, so they can say, well, here's the denominator. Cost is the denominator for my unit of value, and their own logs have what those unit of values consist of. So exporting to BigQuery, this is really important. You've heard us say this a lot if you've heard us speak before, but please set up billing export to BigQuery. Storage is really cheap and analysis is really powerful, and we haven't yet met a customer who regretted turning on BigQuery detailed billing export. And it's something that you can't backfill, so it's a lot of detail, and it goes into your own BigQuery project. So enable that sooner rather than later, because it's very powerful to have your historical usage records.
Absolutely.
Logs and stack drivers. So here's the stack driver screen. Here's stack driver logging, and we're looking at the logs menu. And you can see here in small print that this might be a very detailed log. What would it look like for a VM instance? So here is actually I just took out the actual user here, but I was looking up a colleague's usage of VMs for a demo project, and knew that what I wanted to look at was in a particular resource type, and that it was in the compute product. And if you just find the date range off of reports, you can dive into the stack driver activity logs and immediately hone in on what was going on that day. Especially if you think it's an instance cost, you can look for compute instances insert, and then see what account or who has been inserting new instances. Subsequently, they might get deleted as they're turned off. And here, you would get the actual username for the kind of person or the role responsible for doing this.
Yeah, which is super important, because now you have the ability to go and have a discussion with somebody. If things aren't looking right, it's like, hey, I can see that you were working in here, and these are the things that we observed. Let's have a discussion about maybe how you can optimize or how we can do things differently, to produce a different outcome.
Right. So here, you can kind of see a lot of detail here. You can even see exactly what query I was running at the time.
Right.
And if I was running many queries, this is actually per query, you'd see, oh, well, maybe something's going on here. If I was running a dashboard, maybe it says I'm the one who was the principal email, but it's just running it every second, in which case we would think about, is there something we need to do to optimize BigQuery usage? So best practices, enable it on day one, billing export. Jump from reports, not your invoice, not other things, but reports is a really powerful tool. So jump from reports to answer your cost questions, and then use that to build a culture of showback in your organization.
Right, and showback, I think, is just sort of the start of where most customers are trying to get as they move to cloud. The very mature customers that we've seen have actually moved to a true chargeback model, which really drives a lot of interesting discussions that just never happened before.
Yeah, and then finally, all these other detailed sources, think about the ones that are available to you right off the bat. Think about creating your own that create a really powerful ability to do both the chargeback and this kind of managerial accounting of understanding the cost for each unit value you're delivering. Just to give you an idea of analyses that are trivial with reports, these would be, again, going back to the simple questions, what are cost and cost trends for a given period by billing account, project, product, SKU? What would my cost be if certain discounts or credits were excluded? What are my forecasts to spend for the above? Those are simple.
They're simple, and as a manager, these are the questions that I would expect anybody who owns a project on my team would be able to answer. At any time, say if I just see them in the hallway, and be like, "What's going on with your project?"
Right. Or in a meeting, answer it on the spot. More complex analyses. This is where you can use reports and then really focus. 80-20 rule. Get most of the answer from reports, and then focus where you want to get the rest of the value for your answer using detailed logs that you might need. And these might help you answer questions like, what resource usage was specifically responsible for a cost, or who was responsible for the cost? Or finally, a very important one, we talked to Greg about this a lot, how do I optimize my costs? How do I get better bang for the buck over time?
Absolutely.
So to recap, just so you get all this, again, said I'd say it, and I'll say it, and we'll definitely say it again, is enable BigQuery export on day one. Grant billing reports access to people who need to see it, really to build that culture of showback and ultimately chargeback. Use billing reports as kind of the 80-20 method of getting answers quickly, and then diving into the areas of interest using other tools like billing export or the detailed logs in Stackdriver or your own custom logs. And the power of showback and chargeback really changes the way your teams build things,
Right.
especially when they feel cost ownership and they're expected to answer these questions and empowered to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that last one is one that we can't overemphasize.
Right.
So
there's some content here. You can see the short links. This video will be posted later, but here's some content that kind of go into more detail about what we've talked about today. There's videos, previous episodes in the webinar series. The next episodes in the webinar series will be here as well. A white paper. The documentation has great BigQuery examples if you go into export, and then release notes for whenever we release something new. So that's it for the presentation portion of this talk. So please stay tuned for frequently asked questions. We'll be back in less than a minute. All right, thanks for waiting. Here's some frequently asked questions.
yeah, so this is a great set of questions, and we see them all the time. So first of all, Stephen, maybe you can start with, how do we give billing analysts or somebody permissions to view these reports for an account or a project?
Yeah, so one way to do this is just to use the standard roles that we talked about. Give them billing account viewer if you want them on the billing account. Give them a project user, or give them the specific resource cost get permission in a custom role on the project. If you have kind of custom things you want a financial analyst or billing analyst to do in your org, create a custom role for that and assign it at the org level if that person should have permissions across the org, across all projects.
Sure. So then, actually, maybe the next two we could even take together. How do we view cost by folder or labels? Are there different ways to sort of filter and group and view costs?
So cost by folder. Right now, folder is something that's available in the detailed billing export. So another reason you should enable that. And folders come with a folder number. The names can change over time, so it's good to anchor off the folder number. And then you can query in your query. Determine what folder you care about and look for any cost that has that folder ID in their, we call it project ancestry, but basically in their folder path. Okay. Relatedly, labels are also available in detailed billing export. So there's a field called labels, and those are any resource labels. There's also a project labels field in detailed billing export, and any project labels that you've attached to your usage. So you can write a query on that. There's actually some example queries on the labels usage. We should actually probably add an example query around how to query on folder. Another powerful tool here is to use Data Studio. There's a lot of analyses you can do in Data Studio, just plugging it into billing export table and then creating charts or graphs that don't require you to write any SQL, honestly. There's a lot of WYSIWYG tools within Data Studio that kind of get through the SQL for you.
Let's just say it's simple enough that even I can use it.
But you can probably use quite a bit. Okay.
So the last two questions really, I think, are both around alerts, and we didn't really talk about alerts this morning.
True, yeah, and we'll have like another webinar series that goes a lot more into cost control, but if you think about alerts as the flip side of reporting or the control side of reporting, our goal ultimately over time is to allow you to set an alert for any view you can get in our billing reports. So, think about costs accumulating over time. If you don't want to exceed a certain point, that's an alert threshold. Right. And we want over time to allow you to do that. So right now, and this will improve, but right now there's alerts you can set on a billing account level or on the project level. And the way the alerts work is they send an alert email to the billing account administrators. It's also possible to set up a pub sub message that programmatically gets sent by the alerting system, so you can respond programmatically via cloud functions, or that's a very easy one, or another way that you want to. And then there's different alerting threshold types. So one might just be, I want to alert on last month's spend, right? Some percentage of last month's spend. Another might be, I want to alert on thresholds of an absolute value. I never want to spend more than $1,000. Alert me at 50%, 90%, 100%. Yeah. A final one, which we introduced in March, is I want to be alerted when Google forecasts that I'm going to spend more than one of those values. So if you forecast that you're going to spend more than last month's spend, we could alert you before you've passed 50% of last month's spend.
Yeah, and these are all great because at the end of the day, right, these are real costs that you're talking about, and having visibility and being able to know when you're approaching thresholds is super important.
Great. Well, thank you for tuning in, and please visit Cloud OnAir for more content from Google Cloud experts.
Thank you.